So welcome to our Facebook Live audience along with our Zoom audience. Years ago, when I first heard the term spiritual bypass, I thought we should have bumper stickers and t-shirts and a sign on the Highway 599 bypass that reads Unity, Santa Fe, and exit off the spiritual bypass. Somehow the idea never caught on, so we don't have t-shirts, we don't have bumper stickers, we don't have a sign on 599, but you're hearing it now, that Unity Santa Fe, in my hopes and dreams, is an exit off the spiritual bypass. So my purpose today is to support you embracing challenges with spiritual principles instead of using spiritual ideas and practices to sidestep or avoid challenges. So the human condition is that we do this. We especially do this in New Thought ministries. We avoid and sidestep our flawed, messy humanness, and we use pain-numbing solutions, including spiritual principles, spiritual ideas, spiritual practices. And the spiritual solution is facing, encountering, and embracing the raw truth of who we are and working through our pain consciously. So what is spiritual bypassing? Well, the term was coined by psychologist John Welwood in 1984. And I'm going to turn off my notifications. There we go. So in his classic book, Toward a Psychology of Awakening, Welwood defined spiritual bypassing as using spiritual ideas and practices to sidestep personal, emotional, unfinished business, to shore up a shaky sense of self, or to belittle basic needs, feelings, and developmental tasks. Wow. I don't know about you, but I've done those things. So he also explained in an interview that spiritual bypassing describes a process, he says, that I saw happening in the Buddhist community I was in, and also in myself. He says, although most of us were sincerely trying to work on ourselves, I noticed a widespread tendency to use spiritual ideas and practices to sidestep or avoid facing unresolved emotional issues, psychological wounds, and unfinished developmental tasks. So spiritual bypassing happens when we use spiritual principles and practices to overemphasize the positive and avoid negative thoughts and feelings. And Robert Augustus Masters, in his book, Spiritual Bypassing, points out that there isn't any such thing as a negative emotion. There are negative things we do with our emotions, but our emotions themselves are neither negative or positive. They simply are. And he also said that spiritual bypassing or spiritual correctness, sort of like being politically correct, being spiritually correct, is actually the shadow side of positive spirituality. So can you see how we in Unity are particularly susceptible to spiritual bypassing because we are a positive path for spiritual living? And a recent example that came up about this is several people pointed out to me that before service we do celebrations, but we don't do concerns. Well, maybe that's a symptom of spiritual bypassing because we only want to hear the good news. You know, don't tell us anything negative that's going on. We want to stay in denial. But we want to add celebrations and concerns. And so I started that last week. And the idea is that we know what to celebrate with each other about. We also know what concerns you have so that we can hold you in healing prayer consciousness. So because we focus on the positive and we pray affirmatively, we must be keenly aware of spiritual bypassing. Otherwise, we will go directly to spiritual bypass jail, not pass and go and not collecting $200. You remember that from your Monopoly days. So Masters says in spirit, why, when he's talking about why do we use spiritual bypass? And he says we use it, in spiritual bypassing, we use spirituality to feel better immediately because we want to bypass that pain. So we go directly to spiritual principles, affirmations, or whatever, so that we don't have to feel all that yucky stuff. He says it is a spiritualized strategy, not only for avoiding pain, but also for legitimizing such avoidance, so we can justify it. And John Wellwood said that when spiritual practice is used to compensate for challenging things, they corrupt the actual use of spiritual practice. So let's not corrupt our spiritual practices by using them to avoid and take a spiritual bypass. But what's in it for you and me? Why should we exit the spiritual bypass? Well, Masters points out that the memory of what crippled and still cripples us waits in our cells, our tissues, our organs, and our fascia and skeletal-muscular tensions as fresh as the time it was first imprinted upon us. So those memories that we don't express, that we don't feel our feelings about, they are embedded in our cells and atoms. And the trouble is that the memory is not primarily lodged in our everyday awareness, our conscious awareness, but it shows up, its presence that has long been stripped of its emotional depth. It comes from the depths to the surface, and the memories are found in our unconscious actions, which are less accessible to us. So just as we as a collective social body, he points out, have to now store enormous amounts of radioactive waste in firmly sealed, densely walled receptacles, so too does our body have to store or contain and keep as far away as possible from our everyday consciousness whatever traumatic imprints it has not been able to release. So if they're not released, we keep them stored away. And I tell you from experience, when I did my first 10-day silent retreat and could not talk, have eye contact, listen to music, read, or write for 10 days, I can tell you a lot of my radioactive waste was released. It came to the surface. And so many people don't realize that part of the goal of meditation is to let that stuff come up, to let it come up so that we can witness it and we can let it go. So we can, and if there's any feelings we haven't felt, so that we can actually feel them. Oh, thank you, Tanya. Tanya just turned on my light. It was really warm, so I turned it off and forgot to turn it back on. So yay, Tanya. So anyway, there's all this stuff that's in us, and it's in us whether we want to acknowledge it or not. So he says that in consciously and responsibly embodying all that we are, we become increasingly intimate with all that is. And we may still be a relative solid somebody, he says, but now we're no longer so much in our own way. And spiritual bypassing will lose its appeal for us. He says the body electric, the body speaking its mind, the body as spirit will, if we allow it, blast through our psycho-emotional slumber, bringing us into a more integral wholeness until we clearly are in body what we are in spirit. So I don't know about you, but I think there's a lot in it for us to get off that spiritual bypass. So here's some signs of spiritual or emotional bypassing. First sign is not being present to the here and now, not being fully present with what's going on. What feelings am I having in regard to this situation? Minimizing, superficializing, or outright negating our shadow side and so-called negativity. Overemphasizing the positive and avoiding the negative. Being self-righteous about your spirituality. Being overly detached. Pretending that everything is okay when it's not okay. And striving to immediately meet everything with acceptance and compassion without acknowledging and processing the painful feelings. John Wellwood tells the story of a woman who was raised by a narcissistic mother. And she said that for most of her life, she swallowed her anger and just tried to be the good girl. She rarely lashed out. She kept it all in. And at an early age, she started practicing transcendental meditation, and she read spiritual books as a way to calm her during difficult times. When she approached middle age, a friend suggested that maybe she should seek the assistance of a therapist so she could work on her underlying issues, which were not only causing problems in her relationship, but really was leading her to engage in spiritual bypassing. So during therapy, she learned that it was much healthier to voice her opinions and not keep them bottled up inside. Telling others how she felt wasn't something that she learned as a child, and habits that are ingrained early on are often difficult to change. But when she started voicing her thoughts, this woman not only felt better, but realized that it benefited all her relationships. So after addressing these issues, she continued her spiritual practice of meditation, prayer, yoga, healthy diet, exercise, and grounding, because these were all modalities that supported her transformation rather than replacing it. And after a number of years in therapy, I can relate to this because my therapist commented that he was impressed with how my spiritual beliefs and practices supported his psychological therapy. And I remembered this when I read this statement by author Stephen Diamond, PhD. He said, the most profound psychotherapy is essentially spiritual, and the deepest spiritual quest includes some depth psychology. Neither approach can be excluded on the unpredictable path towards selfhood. And one comment I want to make about what Wellwood said about this woman is it doesn't go into detail, but he said, she started telling people, voicing her thoughts. And I still think that there's an effective way to do that and an ineffective way. So it just doesn't mean that we spew out on everybody and criticize people or share with them every opinion we have. But there is constructive ways to communicate in a way that is mature and what do we call it? Mature and genuine relationships and communication. So don't hear me say that this gives you permission to go spew out all this stuff and be emotionally abusive to others. So how do we do this? How do we get off the spiritual bypass? And we know that the first way every week at Unity Santa Fe is prayer and meditation. And so in prayer and meditation, it's important to allow whatever comes up to bubble up. Allow yourself to witness it. Allow yourself to feel any unfelt feelings that you didn't process back at the time this old stuff originally happened. So use your prayer and meditation in order to clean out, to clear up, and clear your body of all these sankharas, which is called in the Buddhist tradition sankharas, that are just waiting for an opportunity to surprise us when we least expect it. I think the first step, and this reminds me of our whole focus we had last month on healing racism and white privilege, which I hope you all and each one of us continues to hold that vision of that healing. But the first step in healing racism and the first step in getting off the spiritual bypass are both the same. And it's about becoming increasingly aware, deepening our understanding of what it is so that we recognize it when we find ourselves doing it. So we can really see it for what it is and name it so we can relate to it rather than from it. Another thing we can do is embrace what we may be attempting to avoid. And we do that by finding it in the body and just being present to it, making no effort to make it go away, but witnessing it, welcoming it, and allowing our body and mind to reveal what needs to be revealed, because whatever needs to come up will come up. And then it can be healed. We can allow spirit to heal what needs to be healed. So instead of trying to go beyond your personal history, learn to relate to it with as much clarity and compassion as possible so that it serves rather than obstructs your healing and awakening. Master says it this way: turn toward your negativity. Stop pathologizing it. Stop relegating it to a lower status. Stop keeping it in the dark. Go to it. Open its doors and windows. Take it by the hand. Meet its gaze. Feel its woundedness. Feel into it. Feel for it. Feel it without any buffers. And soon you will start to sense that its gaze is none other than your own, perhaps from an earlier time, but yours nonetheless, containing so much of you. He says, humanize it fully. Keep something in the dark long enough and it will probably behave badly. Amen to that. And also, I invite you to join my Spiritual Bypassing Soul Circle beginning this Wednesday at 10 a.m., where we're going to really dive in depth on spiritual bypassing. And especially, I want us to look at how we, in unity with our positive tendencies, how we can reach a balance so that we aren't spiritually bypassing. So today I join Robert Masters in inviting you to find your spirituality in the heart and depths of your humanness. And I invite you to take an exit off the spiritual bypass and step fully into authentic spirituality. And let's begin doing that right now in a sacred time of shared prayer. So I invite us to allow the sound of the ringing bowl to bring us to this present moment. I invite us to relax the body, quiet the mind, open the heart. And just bring to mind and heart a painful situation, not the most painful thing you've ever experienced, but maybe on the lesser side of painful. Bring to mind and heart a painful situation or otherwise seemingly negative emotion that you've recently experienced or maybe are currently experiencing in your life. And become aware of what you are feeling emotionally and where this feeling is located in your physical body. And just be fully present to that sensation, that feeling. Allow it to be what it is as you simply welcome it, knowing that spirit is revealing what needs to be revealed and healing what needs to be healed. Stay present to the feeling. Breathe into it. And let's do that together in the silence. And as we bring our attention back to this time and place, silently hear these words of my adaptation of the grace prayer. For an awareness of divine oneness, I thirst. Into the divine, I commit my spirit, my soul, my body, my life, this challenge, all unforgiven states. Divine will is my will. Divine will is done through me. I am healed at depth. What needs to be revealed is revealed. What needs to be healed is healed. And I glorify divine oneness by living in the fullness of divine grace. I am whole and complete. Thank you, divine nature that is my essence, for the courage and wisdom to embrace challenges with spiritual principles instead of using spiritual principles to sidestep or avoid them. Thank you, divine nature I am. Thank you, thank you, thank you that it is so, and so it is. Amen. So as I bid farewell to our Facebook Live viewers, I just want to remind you all that this was a very short process, and I'm not suggesting that we can exit the spiritual bypass in that short of time, that it may require us working with someone else, a professional, a therapist, a spiritual director, or whoever, but to really make a commitment to yourself to exit the spiritual bypass. And as you do, you are blessed, and I am blessed beyond measure.